There it does get really nice and cold. You can switch my screen. I was in Finland earlier this year, and I asked my friends in Finland, I want to do the sauna bath the way the Finnish people do it. So they took out the chainsaws, and we went to the frozen lake, which was there next to the place where we were staying. To the chainsaw, they cut the ice, and then with these metal bars, we had to remove the ice. This was nice and thick ice. I mean, this was quite the workout. So then we went and turned on the sauna bath, nice and hot. And then we went out and boom. And then you count 1, 2, and 3, and boom. You can see the thickness of the ice. Where my hand is still that ice reaches there. Finnish people have been doing this for a long time. This is something very, very cultural in Finland. As a reminder, a few of our upcoming books, the book about maximizing your immune system, the 21-day turnaround, and the pandemic busters, as well as the children's book, I Have the Flu, What Should I Do? And I'm Feeling Blue, What Should I Do? Again, if you want to download some of those chapters of the Pandemic Busters for free, just go to the website, healthwise.store, or follow that QR code. And once you're there, you select their free downloads, and you will see multiple languages in which the book has been released. I'm going to be citing some of my research. My research is found on that ResearchGate page. You can just go and Google the words Francisco, which is my other name, Francisco Ramirez ResearchGate. There's my Twitter account, Eddie RDMD. Everything is free here, by the way. I'm not selling you anything. And there is that YouTube page, dreddyramirez.com. And the Instagram page, if you want to come and travel with me around the world about the things that I am seeing and so forth. So if you remember yesterday, we said what we were going to talk today. We said we're going to talk about females' health and males' health. So as I'm Latino, we always say first the ladies, You open the door and then you let the lady in. So that's why we'll do the ladies first, and then on the second part we'll deal with the males' health. So females have definite cycles in their bodies, and throughout this cycle, the body is designed to start a new life. So everything starts to get prepared for that. There is a special place where that baby would come and will be nurtured if that fertilization takes place. But as the cycle advances, if that fertilization does not take place, then this special preparation that was made needs to be teared down, and then the menstruation starts to take place as we tear down everything we prepare, and we start that cycle over and over again. Now, even though sometimes it may be uncomfortable and so forth, this menstruation at the same time has many blessings, because those ovaries start to secrete very important hormones that will help you with your health. You can switch me back here to my screen. So then, during menopause, that activity of those ovaries ceases, and then as a result of that, there are multiple hormonal changes that take place. And some females start to experience a certain degree of symptoms. This is not for everybody. So some have it worse, some have it more light, such as the hot flashes, the walls of the vagina starts to become more thin, And then because those hormones that are generated in those ovaries have effects at the level of the brain, even there are changes at the level of the mood. And then another bothersome side effect is the fact that as the hormone changes start starting to take place, there's a little peak of testosterone that starts stimulating the hair follicles of the female, and then you may see, some sprouting there on some hairs and so forth. I have this article there on my Twitter about it. And the reason why that bothersome hot flashes occur is just like the heaters that you have in your home. So what happens is that as you open the heater, more hot water circulates through there and more heat is come into the room. The same thing happens at the level of your blood vessels. Your blood vessels open up, and therefore the heat is released, just exactly like one of those heaters you may have at home. Now, something very interesting happened on the fact that these hot flashes are not universal. Not everybody has that symptom. For example, in the 1980s, if you see the statistics, it tells us that hot flashes were around 14%, 15% of all the females in Japan experienced that symptom during menopause. Now, China's statistics are very similar. In this statistics on China, the number was around 13.5. And one of the reasons why we believe that Chinese and Japanese females have less of these hot flashes is their high intake of soy products. If you ever visit countries like China, you will quickly notice the tremendous intake of soy products that they have. Soy is everywhere there. In fact, for those people that say that, soy is bad and so forth, I mean, the Chinese and Japanese people would have been extinguished by now because they eat so much of this thing. And it's actually the opposite. You find tremendous amounts of populations there in those areas. So the specific components that the soy has have been very well identified and researched. And you can see here in this very well done paper that came out in the journal JAMA, one of the most important medical journals in the world. It was documenting here that you're gonna get the most benefit when you eat the concentrated type of soy products. Okay, those are the ones that are going to be most beneficial as the female goes through the menopausal period. In other words, things like the soy meat and so forth, they're more concentrated, those products. Now, check as we were saying a minute ago, in Japan, about 14%, 15% of the females will experience these symptoms. And something that has happened in many of the Asian countries is that their intake of soy actually is starting to decrease. As foods from the Western world are coming into Asia, it's making substitution from some of their native foods, such as soy, and you can see that throughout the years, that soy intake is actually going down. And you can see here what is happening. For example, in Japan, the amount of fish and meat that people were eating back in the 1960s, look at what has happened with time. Now, dairy products, milk, meat, eggs are starting to increase. Especially, the Japanese people like to copy the Americans. Anything that Americans do, they want to do it. Americans play baseball, they want to play baseball, and so forth. And you can see here that their native foods, such as rice, potatoes, and wheat, notice what has happened with time. There actually has been a decrease in some of those native foods and an increase of westernized and animal protein with time. So what we have understood is that it's not only the fact that you eat soy, but there is something else that helps that soy do its job. And we can learn from them from this area of Mexico. If you go to the southern part of Mexico, I'm exactly from the opposite side, the northwest is in the southeast. There are some native Mexicans there, and in a study that was done among them, the researchers reported that they couldn't find a female that had symptoms of menopause. Fascinating, isn't it? Nobody had their things such as hot flashes, and they couldn't even remember any bad symptoms that happened as they were going to that change of life. And some of the things that these native females are eating is abundant corn tortillas. These are the tortillas. Also, lots of black beans. See, the black beans have certain qualities that are similar to the soybeans, and that's why that positive effect. And also, this plant that is called chaya. This plant is actually dangerous if you don't cook it. It has a toxin. But if you cook it, the toxin goes away, and that's the way that they eat this plant in abundance down there. Also, this other interesting study, this is the Women's Health Initiative. This is a big study that have been following for many years. And they found out that as you reduce the amount of fat, as you increase the amount of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, the amount of hot flashes and bothersome symptoms actually starts to decrease. Together with the fact that this type of diet helps you lose weight, and the fact that you lose weight, that also helps you decrease the symptoms. The dietary intervention seems to ameliorate symptoms over and above the effect of weight change. So you can see here that when you compare the people following a whole food plant-based diet, that vegan diet, notice that the amount of symptoms of that menopause actually decreases, okay, compared to the people that are following the usual omnivorous diet. And this is taking into account multiple different types of symptoms. You can see in every single one of them, the whole food plant-based approach is much better. So we're learning that it's not only what you eat, but most importantly, what type of germs, those beneficial germs that we have in our gut called the microbiome, we're learning that those germs modify what we eat. So if we have the right type of those germs, as we partake of certain foods, we actually get the most benefit out of them. So, for example, in soybean, you have this very important component called an isoflavone that is called daisine. And if you have the right type of germs in your digestive tract, that daisy will be transformed into equal. And we know very well that the ladies that are able to produce that equal will have the least amounts of symptoms related to menopause. Now, notice the fascinating statistic. In the Western world, which we are standing on, in the Western world, only 20 to 30% of the females are able to convert that daisy into equal. Compare to the females in Asia, between 50 to 60% of them are able to do that conversion. And that doesn't have to do with something genetical, that has to do with the germs that inhabit their digestive tract. Here in a study from Australia, they found out that if you were not vegetarian, only 25% of them were able to convert that equal. While the vegetarian ones, it was 59%. Can you see where we're going with this? See, our habits that we are having are encouraging certain type of germs to inhabit our digestive tract. And even though we may eat certain things, we get the most out of it if we have that plant-based diet. In America, in this study, in the non-vegetarians, 0% of them were able to produce that equal, while those people following that whole food plant-based diet, 40% of them were able to produce it. And in order to make that equal, what we need to do, we need to eat more carbohydrates and less fat. So in this study from Ireland, they found out that people that eat a lot of fat on a regular basis, that has a negative effect on the ability of the body to produce that equal. So in this other study from Japan, they saw that this equal has an effect at the level of the PMS. In other words, your menstrual periods are going to be more painful if you are not able to produce that equal. So notice here in this study from Japan, the females that could not produce that equal had 3 times more likely to be suffering from this PMS. Now, this is not an isolated study. There was a fascinating study that was done a few years ago in which they had these females that had tremendously painful menstrual periods. And the protocol of the study was the following. They were going to put these females on a whole food plant-based diet, and then they were going to return them to their old diet so that they can see, what effect that had. As they switched these ladies to a whole food plant-based diet, their menstrual periods went away. To the point that when it came the time to put them back to their old diet, they refused. We don't want painful menstrual periods anymore. So they actually had to stop the study right there and publish those results. And then you can see this a newspaper from Australia, how those plant foods, says this article from the Sun Herald, take the heat out of your menopause. So as you start following that diet, you will see how the painful periods start to decrease, and the females that are going through that process of menopause will actually start feeling better. This is my study. In this study, we were documenting that as females go through the process of menopause, many times they start getting a little bit out of control. Blood pressure starts going up, start gaining weight, fasting glucose start going up, and so forth. And we were documenting in this study that even those females that are going through that change of life, and that the blood pressure starts to go up, the weight starts to go up, and so forth, as they switch to a healthy lifestyle, every single one of them, their markers started to improve in a matter of 18 days of following all those healthy behaviors. And then there's this very interesting study that took place in America and in the rural part of South Africa. What they did in this study, they had African Americans that were living in Pittsburgh, and these are the ones that got the good deal. They assigned them to eat what the people in rural South Africa eat. You know, all these nice whole foods and so forth. And the ones that got the bad deal were the ones from rural South Africa. They put them to eat what the African American in Pittsburgh eats. You know, all these hamburgers and junk food and so forth. And what they show is that in a matter of 14 days of switching your diet, you know, the ones in Pittsburgh got the good diet, microbiome started changing in a positive way. The ones in South Africa, rural South Africa, which they used to eat these wholesome foods and so forth, now they started eating all this American junk food. Their microbiome started changing in a negative fashion. So that's the good news, bad news. It means if your diet was not the best, in a matter of days of making those changes, you will start to see the positive effects of that change. And in this study, they were documenting how hot flashes are gone if you can do the following. Switch to that whole food plant-based diet, decrease the amount of fat in your diet, and specifically in this protocol, what they were doing, they had non-GMO soybeans, and they put those soybeans in that Instapot, you know, this pressure cooker that cooks quite fast, and the females were eating half a cup of these soybeans a day. That was enough to start making changes at the level of their microbiome, start producing some of that egg wall, and those hot flashes started to go away. So in order to help somebody going through those menopause bothersome symptoms, make sure you're eating those soybeans, make sure you're switching your diet to that whole food plant-based diet, and start to decrease the amount of fat you're eating every day. And those half a cup of soybeans a day were providing the raw material to start changing the microbiome, so that the microbiome started to produce that egg wall in a matter of a few days. And make sure that if you're switching to that whole food plant-based diet, to include that vitamin B12, as I mentioned yesterday, 2-3 times a week. That is more than enough. And you can see here where in this study done by my friends in Washington, D.C., they had people on a control group, you know, just doing their usual diet, and then they put people on that whole food plant-based diet, and you can see that in a matter of weeks, the weight started decreasing, and the decrease in the weight was related to the decrease in the symptoms of menopause. And you can see here, the hot flashes started to decrease. Now, the control group also started to decrease, because what happened here is what we call cross-contamination. The ladies that were doing the changes, that were decreasing their hot flashes started talking to the control group and saying, hey, maybe you guys should try some of the soy and so forth. So that's why the cross-contamination, and also the control group started experiencing that. But even the ones following the whole food plant-based diet, notice there was an 84% decrease in the severity of the hot flashes. And you can see here, as the study went by, the severe type of hot flashes started decreasing very much in the intervention group, while the control group, the hot flashes were decreasing, but not the severe type, as they continue eating, the animal products and so forth. And when they also measure quality of life, there's a questionnaire there that you can try to measure this. You can see that the people having the plant-based on the left had much better response as you measure multiple things from physical, sexual, psychological, and vasomotor symptoms. So we know that when you switch to that diet, you will create weight loss, you will decrease your hot flashes, and your quality of life will improve, which is actually a really good deal. Now, there has been in the internet suggested that, soy is going to give you breast cancer and so forth, and it's actually the opposite what the research shows. And there are so many studies about this. This is not just one isolated study here and there. In this study, they found out that the people with the highest amount of soy intake actually decrease the risk for breast cancer. And notice here, this is very interesting, how there was a relationship between how much soy you eat and your risk of cancer. The more soy you ate, the more protection you got against that cancer. And the reason why we know this occurs is because we have different receptors in our bodies. See, soy will actually have little stimulation in the receptors that the females have in the breast and the uterus, and the most stimulation that soy has have to do in the bones, the urogenital system, and the vasculature. And that's why soy is so good for things such as your bone health, because exactly it's stimulating those receptors of estrogen that you have in those 3 different organs. And the question is, why don't we just take the estrogens? Do we actually need to change our diet? Well, it's actually not the best idea. Look at this. This is some of the latest studies showing that if you take the estrogens alone, you increase your risk of endometrial cancer, of stroke, of deep vein thrombosis, and dementia. And then, if the estrogen, you add the progesterone, that progestin, then you actually increase the risk for breast cancer, stroke, deep vein thrombosis, dementia, and myocardial infarction. It's not a good deal to be taking those hormones, because hormones are powerful and end up affecting multiple things throughout your body. For example, in this meta-analysis is when I take all the studies that have been done about that subject and I put them together, and then I try to see, what is the pattern, what type of results I'm seeing as I put these results together. In this study, published in one of the top journals in the world, the journal Lancet, they found out that when you use those hormone replacement therapy, you can see the more you go above the 1, the more the risk. So notice how estrogen did increase that breast cancer, and then the combination estrogen and progesterone increase it even more. And then if you continue to do this long term, 5 to 14 years old, you can see that those numbers actually start to increase even further, both the estrogen and then the combined. And the probability of ending up with a cancer, if you're taking just estrogen alone for 5 years, is 1 in 200, and the combined 1 in 50 females will develop the breast cancer. And if you do this for 10 years, those figures actually double. So 1 in 100 of the estrogen one for 10 years, and 1 in 25 on the females taking the combined therapy. So as you can see, this is something serious and really needs to be evaluated about the possibility of taking this course. And this is from the article I'm citing. In Western countries, there has been about 20 million breast cancers diagnosed since 1990, of which about 1 million would have been caused by menopausal hormone therapy use. So as you can see, the numbers here are very worrisome, and it is better to deal with this at the level of changing the gut bacteria. There appear to be little risk, however, from topical vaginal estrogen preparations, which limits systemic exposure. So if we're going to be using this, the vaginal application in creams, tended to put it more localized there instead of pulling it and putting it systemically into your whole body, which is what worries us and increases the risk of that breast cancer. And continuing with the article, estrogens with or without progestin should be prescribed at the lowest effective doses and for the shortest duration consistent with treatment goals and the risk for the individual woman. So what's the shortest duration? The least possible. In other words, if it's 0, it's even better. And as I mentioned to you, it's not one study here and there. In this other study, they were found out that the more you take that medication, the higher your risk of breast cancer. Other concerns of females going through the process of menopause include weight gain, heart disease, dementia, and breast cancer. The hormones that were being released on a regular basis throughout their menstrual cycle had a protective effect with this. And as those hormones cease, this risk increased. And that's why the beauty of this is that if you switch to that wholesome, whole food, plant-based diet, it has been documented to help with every single one of these risks. In this other study, a friend of mine was the one leading this study. They had these ladies with excess body weight that were postmenopausal, and they put them between whole food plant-based diet, low in fat, versus the usual Western diet. They were not doing any changes at the level of the exercise, and it was a 14-week intervention. So that diet consisted of those fruits, those whole grains, those legumes we're talking about yesterday, remember, your chickpeas, beans, lentils, and so forth, and vegetables. And you can see here, the whole food plant-based diet actually increased the amount of carbohydrates, but these were healthy carbohydrates, and the fat intake was decreased on those people following that whole food plant-based diet. And you can see here, the weight loss was much better on the females doing the whole food plant-based diet. But what happened is that as you continue in the long term, the people on the control, even though they try to lose weight, they actually end up gaining weight. While the females on the whole food plant-based diet, if you remember at the beginning, they had excess body weight. They were able to shed the excess body, and they were able to keep that weight as they went into the second year. And you can see here that this is not just one isolated incident. This is what you're seeing here is called a forest plot, because supposedly they look like trees on a forest. So let me tell you how you read this. When you see this line, anything you see to the right, it means it's working. It's having a positive effect. So you can see here the multiple studies that have been done about body weight and whole food plant-based diet. The majority of them, except for one of them, show that this type of diets help you lose weight in a healthy way. Because you're not like super hungry the whole time and so forth. I mean, you lose weight if you start decreasing very much your amount of food that you're eating. But how long can you do that? You know, there's a point you're saying, you know what, forget it. I'm going to go back to my old ways, you know. I cannot be hungry all the time. But with this method, you are being satisfied and your body starts decreasing that excess body weight. So we know that the reason why this stimulates weight loss is by the fact that as you switch to that wholesome diet, you're eating more fiber. So your stomach, it feels satisfied, you're eating enough, but at the same time, you start eating less calories. And what happened is that animal products are naturally high in fat. The leanest beef you can ever buy is 29% of all the calories of that piece of steak is going to be fat. That's too much. Low fat is defined around 14% or less of all the total calories should be fat in order to be considered low fat. The chicken with the least amount of fat is 23%. That's too much fat. And salmon, 52% of all the calories is fat. White tuna, 16%. And notice the whole foods, such as broccoli, 8%, beans, 4%, rice, 1 to 5%, depending on the type of rice, and sweet potato, 1%. See, you don't need to be going to the store with your nutrition book and say, okay, should I buy this one or not? Just follow the principle, and those whole food diet items are naturally going to be low in fat. And cheese is 70% fat. Now let me teach you this principle. Fats, we can actually see how good they are just by visualizing them. Fats that are solid at room temperature are the worst. Lard is there. This vegetable shortening, is there. Watch out. Coconut oil is there, is solid room temperature, not the best thing. So if 70% of cheese is fat, is cheese solid or is cheese liquid at room temperature? It's solid, therefore which type of fat is the one that it has? Is the negative type of fat, the saturated fat, the one that stimulates the weight gain and so forth. So watch out for energy-rich foods. Even olive oil. Some people say, oh, olive oil is so healthy. Do you have your salad there? Put this tongue there. You just ruin your salad, You just increase the caloric intake tremendously there. Watch out. Don't trick yourself. And another effect that whole food plant-based diet has is that when we eat those foods, our bodies start to burn even more calories. This is what is called the after-meal calorie burn. And your heart health this has been very well demonstrated. I know very well personally Dean Ornish. He did this study demonstrating that people with atherosclerosis, closure of the arteries of the heart, as he put them on a whole food plant-based diet, exercise, stress management, and tobacco, that caused their cholesterols to go down. And when they check by studies of imaging the arteries of the heart, they demonstrated that 82% of those participants actually started to reverse that heart disease, which is the good news. And what about brain health? Well, we know that there's a relationship between the amount of saturated fat that you're eating and your risk for Alzheimer's disease. Therefore, the advantage of cutting all those solid oils that I was talking to you about, as you cut down those solid oils, you actually decrease the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And watch out for those trans fats that we were talking about yesterday, remember? We mentioned that many of the baked goods have that partially hydrogenated fats, not the best thing. You can see it tremendously increases your risk for Alzheimer's disease if you eat that type of fats. And vitamin E has a beneficial effect. In this study, they were documenting that the people that eat the most vitamin E, the least the risk for Alzheimer's disease. This is a paper published in JAMA. So there's a difference between taking the supplement of vitamin E and eating foods that are high in vitamin E. The most beneficial effect is when you eat it from your food. And in this study, separate study, they were documenting how your memory was better when you eat the most amounts of leafy green vegetables. These are type of foods that you need to find a way to include them on a regular basis, on a daily basis, as it has beneficial effect at the level of aging, remember the inflammation, and also your memory. So among those leafy green vegetables that are beneficial, you have the spinach, the kale, the collards, the lettuce. Not only are they rich in that iron, but also folate and multiple other phytochemicals that have positive effects of your brain. So what about breast cancer and soy? Well, this is what is called the Adventist Health Study. There's more than 150,000 people that participated on this study. And notice how it is very well documented in this study that the more milk these Adventists drink, the higher the risk for breast cancer. This is something very, very well documented. And the reason why that happens is the following. Remember how we were talking about taking hormone supplements is not the best? Remember? Okay. This is what happens. When you see how the hormones behave on the cow, as the cow starts to advance in its pregnancy, the amount of estradiol starts to increase in the blood of these cows. And notice what happens in the amount of estradiol on milk. So when the baby cow is born, there's a tremendous increase on estradiol in the body of the cow. And that estradiol comes out, guess where? In the dairy of that cow. So it's like taking that hormone supplement by taking dairy. And remember that this doesn't go away. It doesn't matter if it's in the yogurt form, if it's in the ice cream form. It is still those very high levels of estradiol are present. So there is not such thing as a hormone-free milk. Every dairy milk has that estradiol. You cannot get dairy with that estradiol present. And that's why we know that very well. Study over study shows that linear relationship. The more dairy they take, the higher the risk for breast cancer. So what we're going to need to do, we need to switch to that whole food, plant-based diet, plus that vitamin B12. In that way, we will start to decrease the amount of that fat. We will increase that fiber that will start stimulating, changing our gut microbiome, and then we'll become more efficient at creating that egg wall that will not only help with the symptoms of menopause, but females that are going through their normal cycle, it will decrease the pain and bothersome symptoms related to PMS. So we're going to go ahead and take a little 10-minute break, and we'll come back to deal with the males.